murdered in November of 1781. So we're going to jump into talking about Luke Collingwood and the Zong slave ship. We're going to talk about that because it is such an amazing and ridiculous story when you begin to think about it. And when you think about history, you really have to go back and remember history to make sure it doesn't happen again. You know, Malcolm X said, of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. When I think about that, when I think about history, I think of history is literally all of human history. So it tells you, what's possible and what has been possible in human history. And obviously, there's many more things to come, but it's such an important field of study. So when we say to ourselves, something like that could never happen, well, it did. It actually did happen. And in order to make sure it doesn't happen again, we have to remember it. One of the best or worst things you can do with respect to history is to never learn a lesson or to forget a lesson. And when I think about history and African history and African American history, it becomes very important because it speaks to the soul of who we are. It speaks to the soul, and it allows you to think about things in terms of truth and justice in a way that you just cannot ignore. So we can try to be, in this day and age, in the 21st century or what have you, and feel as if some of those things happened a long time ago and they never affect us. We would be missing the whole point and the whole lesson of history, and which is that these things have happened, they happened before, and they could happen again if we're not vigilant. And so we should learn the lessons of our ancestors and learn the lessons of history. So for so many very important reasons, and truth and justice is one of the main reasons why we should learn it. So I talk about the Zong and the slave ship, the Zong, in 1781. And the events that we're going to talk about took place on November 29th, 1781, up until the early part of December. And the Zong was a ship, a slave ship that was based out of Liverpool. And when you think about a slave ship and you think about what it took to take people and to lock them in chains and to put them on board a ship and to put them on board a ship that was fashioned for doing so, fashioned for that purpose, fashioned for putting people in the bottom of it and holding them in chains and putting them on shelves where you would lay one on top of the other, almost with very little room above their faces in terms of how the shelves were stacked. When you think about that, you understand and you know that it took many people to put a slave ship in the water. It wasn't like one person did this. A lot of time we'll talk about events in history, and we'll talk about this particular event with Luke Collingwood, who was the captain of the Zong, and we'll call it the Zong Master or a massacre, or we'll talk about it as if Luke Collingwood was the person or the only person or the main person who was the evil person in this event. But actually, everybody who put that slave ship in the water, everybody who contributed to it were part of this evil event. Everybody was a part of it. It wasn't like it was just one person. We like to do that in history, but in reality, when you step back and think about it, so many hands went into what was slavery on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. So many hands went into making that take place. And that's something we got to tell the truth about and realize and own up to, and not say that, it wasn't me, it was you, it wasn't me. Own up to that people did this, human beings did this. And when you think about the ship itself, the Zong, as I mentioned, was based out of Liverpool. And this was in the 1780s, 1781. And Liverpool was becoming a major port in England for slave trading, and a major port for shipbuilding and merchants and commerce that was going back and forth. And one of the significant parts of the trade was trading in people, human beings. And so you would have merchants build ships and shipbuilders build ships. You would have merchants supply the ships with medicine and food and alcohol, things like rum with which to either drink or trade once they got to Africa. You had bankers who helped bankroll and loan the money to the owners of the ships. You had insurers, and this is a central part of the Zong trip. And the Zong whole issue was the fact that there was an insurance policy involved with what we're about to talk about, the events that took place with the Zong. So you had insurers that were a part of this. You had the government that sanctioned this. The Royal African Company that was sanctioned and chartered by the royalty and the leadership in England were basically sanctioning the trade and sanctioning the sale of human beings and the taking of human beings. They were sanctioning it. And many people who were in the royalty and in the hierarchy, if you will, some of the richer people in the area, they make money off it. They invested in these companies. Some of them made money, some of them maybe lost money, but that didn't matter. They were investors in this. Some of the famous people about in English history were investors in slave trade and slave ships. So it took merchants and bankers and the government, the royalty, the church, which also sanctioned it. It took suppliers, it took a crew, it took a captain, it took all these people and people to actually fashion and to build this together to put this slave ship in the water. And it took the support of people. It wasn't like this took place and this happened without people in Europe and in various places who were taking part of this, who were accepting this and taking part in this. So that doesn't take away any of the horribleness of the massacre that would take place as a result of the Zong. So the Zong made its way to Africa, to the coast of Africa in Ghana, in 1781, and it got off the coast of Ghana, and it was also around Equatorial Guinea. And it picked up Luke Collingwood, who was the captain of the Zong. He decided to do what was called a tight packing method. He decided to put over 400 people in the bows of the ship, the Zong, the slave ship, to pack them really tight with the thought that maybe some of them were going to die. He knew people were going to die. I mean, the Middle Passage, it wasn't a surprise if people died. That was expected. He figured that if you packed a whole lot in, even though a certain percentage would die, you still have enough left because you started with so many. You still have enough left when you got to your destination, which was Jamaica for them, so that you still have enough to make money off of, and it wouldn't matter. So this is how they were treating human lives and treating the human beings and the people that were there. So as they got on the ship and they got aboard the ship and they left the coast of Africa and they made their way to Jamaica. So they were going to Jamaica, and this was like a 2.5 month trip. So this was a trip that took a long time, and the people there were suffering. The people there were sick. Many people died and became sick as a result of this trip. Many of the Africans who were taken and enslaved and in chains were sick. And so Luke Collingwood got lost. He thought Hispaniola, the island where, is Haiti, Dominican Republic, he thought Hispaniola was Jamaica. And it wasn't, obviously. So when he kind of got there or had his way there, he realized that he was at the wrong place, headed in the wrong direction, and he had to turn the ship around to go to Jamaica. And at this time, this was 1781. This was the fall of 1781. It was September, then it ended up being November as they were on their trip, this long trip where he got lost. And as they get into the end of November, and around November 29th, to be specific, he starts to say, we're running out of water. And we have to right our ship and we have to get to Jamaica. And, we went the wrong way, the wrong place. We need to, therefore, get rid of some cargo. We need to throw some people overboard because we don't have enough water and supplies. And a lot of them are sick. They're going to take up too much of the stuff. We need to kill them. And his crew was somewhat hesitant to do that. His crew was like, what are you saying? He was like, look, this is what we need to do. We have to, in order for us to be able to get insurance from this, because it's not just him. It's not the captain. The captain is not in control of the ship. It's the owners, right? The captain is running the ship while it's at sea, but it's the owners who are making the cargo, who are making the money off of this, and who supposedly own the cargo. This is their cargo, if you will, and it's their trip. It's their business, and he's an employee or a contractor for their business. He said, basically the owners of the ship, the insurance people will not pay the owners of the ship if the people who are on the ship, the cargo, if you will, dies due to natural causes. So a lot of them are sick. There are a bunch of them who are sick. I'm assuming they had infections or whatever their sickness were. And if they die due to natural causes, the owners won't get repaid for this, for their loss, so to speak, because they were hoping to sell these people, and now they can't sell these people because they died of natural causes, and the insurance contract or the insurance way it's written will not pay you for that. But if you have to dump the cargo or dispose of the cargo for the safety of the crew, or to save the rest of the ship for some reason, or to save the rest of the cargo, then they will pay you. You can get reimbursed under the insurance contract that was written up. So he said, so we have to do this. We're running out of water. We need to get rid of some people. And if we get rid of them because we're out of water and because we're in danger of dying ourselves, then we can get insurance on these people when we get back to England. And so at least one member of the crew was really hesitant, was like, no, I don't want to do this. He refused. But the other members went ahead and did it. They were being, told to, enforced to by the captain, by Luke Collingwood. And then the other member who was hesitant began to do it. He participated. So the first day, November 29th, 1781, they brought up some 54 Africans, people who were sick down below in the bows, and they chained them together. They put their hands together, they chained them together, and they threw them overboard. They threw them overboard in groups. They threw them overboard with chains so they would not be able to swim. So they were sure they would drown. They were dead. They killed them. They murdered them. The next day, November 30th, they brought up another 42 Africans, chained them together, as I mentioned, put their hands together, put them in chains, and threw them overboard. This was men, women, and children. They did not, men, women, and children, they threw them overboard and killed them. And then, by some stroke of nature, there was some rain that took place and they were able to capture some water from the rain. And some of the crew members thought or had hoped that they wouldn't have to do that again. But the captain, Luke, said, no, we need to do it again. Even though we got some water, we need to do it again. And so for a third day, they brought up some 30 some odd people, my God, and they put them in chains and they threw them overboard. But there were 10 of them who were fighting, who tried to fight back. Remember, many of them were sick, near death. They had been on this trip for 2.5 months. They were emaciated. They were weak. But 10 of them managed to fight back. 10 of them fought back and refused to be chained. The others were thrown overboard. The 10 who refused to be chained jumped to their deaths, jumped to the water on their own, and they refused to do it while being chained. They were probably going to be shot anyway and killed on the boat and just dumped over if they had not jumped. There was one person who had managed to, when he jumped over, to grab onto a rope, to get a hold of a rope that was hanging off the side of the rope of the ship, and he managed to climb back up amazingly and hide himself on the ship with all the commotion, and he ended up surviving that way. But some 132 people at least were killed in that way. They were, as I mentioned, chained together on separate days, chained together with their hands and thrown overboard so they could die in the sea on their way to Jamaica. When Luke Collingwood and the whole ship got to Jamaica and finally made it, they sold the people on the ship. They did what they were paid to do, what they were doing, which was a part of the business and the quote unquote trade, which was not a trade. They sold the people, and then they made their way back to England. And when they got back to England, they had the reports because they kept very specific records. Because remember, these were people in England who were making all of this go forward. These were people in Europe who were making money off of this. It was a business. You had all the records being kept, so you could know how much money you made, how much they sold for, how many people did you start with, how many people died, what happened on the trip. All those things were important because the numbers had to add up. Because if you bought a certain amount of people while you were in Africa, and you only have a certain amount to sell, well, all that will be a part of the accounting. So when they got back to England, they told them what happened. They showed them the records. All the people said this is what happened. And Collingwood said, we had to do this because of the water, and the water was low on our ship, and we would have died. So we had to make that choice. And so there ends up being a fight, if you will, a dispute between the owners of the Zong and the insurers of the Zong and the insurance company. And they're fighting because the insurers feel like that was not a case where they need to pay according to the contract, according to the contract of the insurance. They did not need to pay the owners for the people who were murdered. And the owners felt like, yes, you do have to pay. That's a part of our contract. So it ends up going to court. And in the court, it's amazing because you can read about this. You can look it up. There are Lord Mansfield is one of the people who was the judge over one of the trials, and you can find articles about this and written accounts of people who were there. But the interesting part when you read about this and you dig into it is that never really in the official judicial proceedings was it really examined that these were people. Of course, people were upset. People were making a lot of noise about this, and people were trying to get the judicial system to say this is murder. I mean, everybody is saying this. Everybody admitted to this happening. This is murder. And the generals, the solicitor general, and the lawyers on behalf of the owners and even on behalf of the insurance people say, what are we talking about in terms of these humans? What are we talking about humans being thrown overboard? This was not humans. These were goods. This was property. This is how our law treats them. You can't even come and bring this in front of us as if these were humans that were thrown. This was property according to English law. And the way we proceed on things, we can't even think about it in that way. So no one was ever prosecuted criminally, to my knowledge, with respect to this for murders, even though they all admitted that this is what took place. And the first trial ruled in favor of the owners, so the insurers would have to pay them for a certain amount of money for each person that was killed. There was a second trial that was ordered, and that's when Lord Mansfield, and that's part of the movie that was done about it, that's when Lord Mansfield seems to raise some questions of this being sickening and trying to introduce some humanity into this. And a second trial was supposed to have happened, but I don't think the second trial ever happened. And the owners kind of dropped the case because there was so much attention being put to the case. But at the end of the day, this wasn't about them. This was about the people, the human beings whose lives were killed. Whatever happened, however they got there, whatever happened in terms of their lives and them being on that slave ship that day, them being thrown overboard, them being murdered in a horrible, cruel way, is something we have to remember and know. The issue of slavery, things like the Holocaust, things like horrible things that happen in human history, these are things we should know. We should never forget, because they could happen again. They already did happen. So God bless you. Please put anything down in the comments you'd like to share. I want to remember the people of the Zong today, and God bless you. I hope you have a good day.